Dathomir was not a world that offered comfort or kindness. Its surface was painted in shades of crimson and shadow, an unyielding landscape of jagged peaks and twisted swamps. The air was thick, carrying the faint tang of decay, as though the planet itself mourned its violent history. This was a place where survival was earned, not granted, and where the whispers of ancient power lingered in every corner. The Night Sisters ruled here, wielding a magic that was as enigmatic as it was terrifying. They were more than mere witches. They were architects of the planet's balance, keepers of a primal force that bound life and death. Their rituals called forth spirits older than memory, weaving spells that could heal or destroy with equal ease. Clad in robes that seemed to blend into the shadows, they moved like phantoms, their presence commanding both awe and fear. Their dominion was not absolute. The Night Brothers, the Zabrak males of Dathomir, lived under their rule. They were warriors, their skin etched with markings that spoke of pain and defiance. Chosen more for strength than for any sense of equality, they served the Night Sisters in battle and ritual, bound by tradition and an unspoken fear of what rebellion might bring. It was among these Night Brothers that Maul's story began. Dathomir's political landscape was a battlefield of its own. The Night Sisters wielded their magic not only against external threats, but also in the constant dance of power within their ranks. Ambition thrived here, and loyalty was a fragile, shifting thing. Mother Talzin stood at the apex of this hierarchy, her authority cemented by her unmatched sorcery and an understanding of the larger galaxy's schemes. She was not content with Dathomir's isolation. Her eyes were set on something greater, a path to power that would extend far beyond the crimson mists of her home. It was under Talzin's watch that Maul was born. From the moment he drew his first breath, the Night Sisters claimed his life as part of their grand designs. His lineage was carefully observed, his connection to the Force noted with quiet satisfaction. The rituals that followed were not the soft blessings of a proud community, but brutal rites meant to draw out his potential. Pain was not an enemy here, it was a teacher, and Maul learned its lessons well. The markings on his skin were more than decoration. They were symbols of survival, etched through blood and fire as he grew among the Night Brothers. These patterns told the story of a child shaped by a world that demanded resilience. His brothers, including savage Opris, shared the same struggles, though even they noticed something different about Maul. His silence carried weight. His gaze held an intensity that spoke of something deeper. Life on Dathomir was harsh, but it was also teeming with life. The creatures that roamed its swamps and skies were as fierce as the people who lived there. Rancors were not just beasts. They were allies, trained by the Night Sisters to carry their warriors into battle. Spiders larger than men wove webs that glistened in the eerie light, while the mists themselves seemed alive, twisting around intruders like sentient shadows. Every corner of this world was a test, and every test was a lesson. As Maul grew, so too did his strength, but the shadows around him grew darker still. Whispers of a visitor began to circulate, a figure who had come not to admire the Night Sisters' power, but to take it for himself. This was Darth Sidious, a man whose ambition rivaled even Talzin's. His arrival marked a shift, a moment when Dathomir's insular world collided with the larger galaxy's machinations. Sidious was not interested in the rituals or the politics of Dathomir. He was drawn to the raw power he saw in Maul, a potential that could be molded and weaponized. Talzin, for all her strength, saw an opportunity in Sidious's interest. Yet it was a dangerous gamble, one that would set the stage for a series of betrayals that would reshape both Maul's life and the fate of the galaxy. The story of Maul's beginnings is not one of gentle beginnings or destined heroism. It is a tale forged in the unforgiving fires of Dathomir, a world where power and survival are one and the same. From these dark origins, a force would rise, one that carried the scars of its past and the hunger to carve its place in the galaxy's future. The arrival of a child on Dathomir was rarely a quiet affair. Life itself was considered a transaction with the dark forces that ruled the planet. When Maul was born, the winds howled louder than usual, and the ever-present crimson mists seemed to deepen in color. For the Night Sisters, such signs were not ignored. They watched closely, interpreting the omens with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. This was no ordinary birth, and they knew it. Mother Talzin, ever vigilant, stood at the center of these observations. She saw the markings of potential before anyone else. It wasn't just the force that clung to Maul. It was the way it moved around him, erratic and unyielding, as though testing his limits even in infancy. Talzin had long believed that her people were destined to play a larger role in the galaxy's schemes, and this child seemed to carry the weight of that belief. It was a dangerous thing to place such hope on one so young, but Talzin thrived on taking risks others would not. Maul's earliest years were a blur of rituals and training, experiences that most would consider harsh, but were simply life on Dathomir. The Night Sisters began their work on him almost immediately, binding him to their ways through rites that called on the oldest spirits. These ceremonies were not for the faint of heart. They often demanded pain, a sacrifice that shaped the child even as it tested his resilience. For Maul, this was simply the beginning of what life would always be, a series of trials that demanded he prove his worth. As he grew, the markings of his people began to adorn his body. These were no ordinary tattoos, but the result of ancient rituals that etched power into his skin. Each line carried meaning, a story of what had been endured and what was yet to come. Maul bore them without question, even as the pain seared through him. To him, pain was not just an obstacle, it was a reminder of his purpose, even if he did not yet fully understand what that purpose was. Life among the Night Brothers was as brutal as it was isolating. The Zabrak males were treated as tools by the Night Sisters, their lives dictated by the whims of their matriarchs. Yet even in this hierarchy, Maul stood apart. He was smaller than some of his brothers, but faster, his movements sharp and calculated. Where others relied on brute strength, Maul used precision and instinct, often outpacing those who underestimated him. His brothers, including Savage Opress, noted his intensity, a quiet fire that seemed to burn just beneath the surface. Talzin's influence loomed large over Maul's upbringing. She was not a warm figure, but she was a constant presence, her guidance shaping his understanding of the world. She taught him to see beyond the immediate, to understand the currents of power that flowed unseen. "The galaxy does not care for fairness," she would say, her voice calm but unyielding. "It rewards those who seize what they desire." Even as a child, Maul internalized these lessons. He did not question the sacrifices demanded of him, nor did he seek comfort in the way others might. His mind was sharp, his resolve sharper still, and Talzin saw in him the foundation of something greater. She did not tell him of her plans, but she ensured that every step he took aligned with them. The other Night Sisters observed Maul with a mix of fascination and unease. He was not theirs in the way other Night Brothers were, and that distinction mattered. While the males were often seen as tools or warriors to be used, Maul was treated as an investment. This was not favoritism, it was calculation. Talzin believed Maul could become something more, a force that would extend Dathomir's influence far beyond its crimson borders. Maul, however, did not dwell on these dynamics. His focus was on survival, on mastering the skills that would ensure his place among his people. He sparred with his brothers, hunted the beasts of Dathomir, and endured the constant trials set before him. With each success, his confidence grew, though it never bordered on arrogance. There was always a quiet discipline to his actions, a reminder of the lessons Talzin had drilled into him. By the time Maul reached his early adolescence, his abilities had begun to surpass even Talzin's expectations. The whispers of his potential spread beyond Dathomir, drawing the attention of those who would shape his future. But for now, he remained a child of darkness, shaped by a world that demanded strength above all else, unaware of how soon his path would change forever. Dathomir's mists were thick the day he arrived. The air felt heavier, as if the planet itself sensed a disturbance far greater than any storm or beast that had prowled its crimson swamps. Darth Sidious, cloaked in shadow and ambition, was not a man given to idle curiosity. He moved with purpose, his presence cutting through the world's oppressive stillness like a blade. His arrival was not heralded by banners or announcements, but by the tension that followed him, settling uneasily over those who crossed his path. Mother Talzin met him without fanfare. She understood power when she saw it, and Sidious radiated power unlike anything she had encountered before. His reputation preceded him, whispered through the Force, and carried by those who dared to speak of the Sith. Sidious had no interest in pleasantries. His voice was sharp, deliberate, each word measured as though calculated to pierce directly to the heart of the matter. "I have come for the boy," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. Talzin's response was calm but guarded. She had anticipated this moment, though the exact timing was impossible to predict. The boy, Maul, had grown strong under her watch. His connection to the Force had deepened, his instincts sharpened by years of survival and training. But Sidious's gaze was not drawn to the boy's present abilities. It was fixed on his potential, the raw, untapped power waiting to be shaped into something far more dangerous. Maul, unaware of the conversation that would determine his future, was sparring with his brothers in a clearing not far from the Night Sisters' enclave. His movements were precise, each strike and parry honed through years of repetition. The other boys were larger, stronger, but Maul's ferocity and precision gave him an edge. As he struck his opponent to the ground, his eyes flicked toward the horizon. He felt it before he saw it, the presence of something unfamiliar, something cold. When Talzin called for him, Maul obeyed without hesitation. He approached the meeting place cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Sidious. There was an air about the man that was both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. Sidious regarded Maul with a detached curiosity, as though assessing a piece of rare machinery. Without a word, he extended his hand, gesturing for Maul to step closer. "You are strong," Sidious said, his voice low. "But strength alone is useless without purpose." Maul didn't respond. He didn't need to. The words settled in his mind like seeds, their implications slowly taking root. For years, his life had been defined by survival and obedience. But this man spoke of something greater, something more significant. Talzin watched silently, her expression unreadable. She had her own ambitions, but even she could not deny the gravity of this moment. Sidious was offering Maul a path unlike any she could provide. It was a path of darkness and dominance, of power wielded without restraint. It was also a path that would take him away from Dathomir, perhaps forever. The decision was made swiftly. Sidious did not ask for Maul's consent, nor did he offer any reassurances. He merely turned and began walking toward his ship, fully expecting the boy to follow. Maul hesitated for only a moment, his gaze flickering toward Talzin. She gave a small nod, her approval more an acknowledgement of inevitability than an act of encouragement. Maul followed. The journey from Dathomir was silent. Sidious offered no explanation, no words of comfort. Maul sat quietly, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend the enormity of what was happening. The world he had known, harsh as it was, had been his home. Now he was stepping into the unknown, guided by a man who exuded an authority that bordered on terrifying. When they arrived at Sidious's hidden stronghold, the reality of Maul's new life became clear. The training he had endured on Dathomir was nothing compared to what awaited him here. Sidious was not a teacher in the traditional sense. He was a sculptor, and Maul was his raw material. Every lesson, every command, was designed to break him down and rebuild him into something sharper, more precise. The boy from Dathomir was gone. In his place, a weapon was beginning to emerge, one forged in the fires of pain, discipline, and an unrelenting drive to prove himself worthy of the power that had chosen him. The training began immediately. Darth Sidious wasted no time, for he had no patience for weakness. Maul, still a boy by most standards, was thrust into a world where failure was punished without hesitation, and success was rarely acknowledged. Sidious did not coddle or nurture. He demanded. Pain and fear were not byproducts of the training. They were its foundation. Maul's days were structured to the second. From dawn until long after darkness fell, he was tested in every conceivable way. Physical drills pushed his body beyond its limits, while mental exercises honed his ability to focus under pressure. He was expected to endure exhaustion, hunger, and injuries without complaint. Sidious believed that suffering sharpened the will, and Maul's suffering was relentless. The training grounds were as harsh as the lessons. Isolated in the depths of a hidden fortress, they were designed to break the spirit of anyone who stepped foot within them. The arena was a maze of jagged terrain, filled with traps and droids programmed to show no mercy. Maul learned quickly that survival here depended on instinct, speed, and precision. Hesitation was punished, often brutally. Sidious himself was an omnipresent force, watching Maul with a critical eye. His presence was both intimidating and electrifying, a constant reminder of the stakes. He would interject only to correct, often with a sharp reprimand or a demonstration that left no room for interpretation. When Maul faltered, the Sith Lord's voice would cut through the air, cold and unforgiving. "Do it again," he would say, and Maul would rise, bloodied but determined. Each exercise served a purpose. Sidious believed that the ultimate weapon needed to be adaptable, capable of operating in any environment and against any foe. Maul was trained to fight with and without a lightsaber, to navigate treacherous terrain, and to use the Force in ways that went beyond mere combat. He was taught to anticipate his opponent's moves, to exploit weaknesses without hesitation, and to deliver decisive blows without remorse. The construction of his double-bladed lightsaber was a defining moment. It wasn't merely a tool. It was an extension of himself, a reflection of the precision and aggression Sidious had instilled in him. The process was grueling, involving not just the physical assembly of the weapon, but also the imbuing of the crystals with Maul's own dark energy. The blade, when ignited, burned with a ferocity that matched its wielder. The lightsaber became central to Maul's training. Its unorthodox design demanded absolute mastery of technique, and Sidious ensured that every movement was practiced until it became second nature. Maul spent hours in the arena, the weapon's twin crimson blades humming through the air as he fought against droids programmed to exploit even the smallest mistake. Each misstep was met with searing pain, as the droid's stun weapons struck home, a stark reminder that perfection was not optional. Sidious also drilled Maul in the art of deception and infiltration. The Sith did not rely solely on brute force, they were masters of manipulation and strategy. Maul learned to move unseen, to strike from the shadows, and to use fear as a weapon. His master taught him that a true Sith was more than a warrior. They were an agent of chaos, sowing discord and confusion before delivering the final blow. But the lessons were not without their cost. Maul's body bore the scars of his training, each one a testament to the challenges he had overcome. His mind, too, was shaped by the experience. The boy who had left Dathomir was gone, replaced by a creature of pure determination. There was no room for doubt or hesitation, no space for anything but the drive to excel and to prove himself worthy of Sidious's time. The transformation was slow but undeniable. With each passing day, Maul grew stronger, faster, and more cunning. He was no longer a boy, nor was he merely an apprentice. He was becoming the weapon Sidious had envisioned, a force of destruction, honed to perfection through pain and discipline. And though Maul's every waking moment was consumed by training, the thought of failure never left him. He understood that his master's expectations were absolute, and that failure would not be met with forgiveness. It was this understanding that drove him, pushing him beyond his limits again and again. For Maul, there was no other option. He would succeed, or he would be discarded like so many before him. The ceremony was anything but grand. There were no witnesses, no celebratory fanfare. In the cold, shadowed chamber of his master's stronghold, Maul knelt before Darth Sidious, his body bruised and bloodied from the trials that had come before. He was barely more than a boy, but his eyes burned with the intensity of someone who had endured far beyond his years. It was here that his master, with deliberate and weighty words, gave him his Sith title. "You are no longer just an apprentice," Sidious began, his voice a calm, sharp edge. "You are Maul, a blade to cut through the galaxy, a destroyer of those who stand in our way." Maul had no need for a surname, no ties to a family or a legacy beyond the one Sidious would carve into the stars. The name itself was a weapon, simple and brutal, much like the being who now bore it. The moment was both an honor and a burden, the culmination of years of torment and training, and the beginning of something far darker. The title was more than a label. It was a transformation, a shift in Maul's very identity. From that point forward, everything he did, everything he became, would be rooted in anger, fear, and pain. These emotions had always been present, but now they were no longer obstacles to be overcome. They were tools, and Maul began to wield them with a precision that came from both practice and necessity. Sidious wasted no time in reinforcing this foundation. "Your hate will sustain you," he told Maul during one of their many grueling sessions. "Pain is fleeting, fear is a shadow, but hatred is eternal. It will give you strength when your body fails. It will guide you when your mind falters." Maul clung to these teachings like a lifeline. Each time his body broke under the weight of Sidious's demands, he found the strength to rise again by embracing the hatred within him. He remembered every insult, every wound, every moment of suffering that had shaped his life. They became a reservoir of power, one he could draw upon without hesitation. His anger burned like a furnace, fueling his every move, sharpening his every thought. This newfound strength did not come without cost. The boy he had once been, the child who had played among the mists of Dathomir, was gone. What remained was a being forged in the crucible of suffering, a weapon honed to perfection by the dark side. Maul's existence revolved around a single purpose: to serve Sidious's will and to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Yet even in his loyalty, a seed of resentment began to grow. Maul's hatred was not limited to the Jedi, whom he had been raised to despise. It extended to his master, the one who had torn him from his home, who had subjected him to unimaginable pain, and who now wielded him like a tool. This resentment was buried deep, hidden beneath layers of obedience and fear, but it was there, simmering in the background, waiting for its moment to surface. For now, Maul focused on the tasks before him. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities to prove himself worthy of the name he had been given. And though his body ached and his mind often teetered on the edge of exhaustion, he found solace in the knowledge that his suffering had meaning. He was no longer a child of Dathomir, no longer a nameless apprentice. He was Darth Maul, a being shaped by the dark side, defined by his hatred, and destined for vengeance. The moment Sidious deemed him ready, Maul was sent into the galaxy to test the skills he had honed through years of brutal training. These missions were not grand campaigns or carefully orchestrated battles. They were calculated tests, meant to pit Maul against formidable opponents while keeping him hidden in the shadows. The galaxy was not yet ready to know the Sith had returned, and Sidious ensured that Maul's actions would leave little evidence of his true allegiance. The targets Sidious selected were varied: smugglers who had interfered with Sith interests, bounty hunters who had stepped too far into the wrong territory, and most notably, Jedi Knights who strayed too far from their strongholds. Each mission was designed to challenge Maul's abilities and test his unwavering loyalty. Failure was not an option. The first encounter with a Jedi was not the climactic duel one might imagine. It was a small skirmish, a confrontation born out of necessity rather than grand design. A Jedi Knight, investigating reports of Sith artifacts, found himself cornered in the ruins of a forgotten temple. Maul, clad in his dark robes and armed with his newly constructed double-bladed lightsaber, confronted him without hesitation. The fight was fast and brutal. The Jedi, caught off guard by Maul's ferocity and unorthodox weapon, struggled to adapt. Maul, on the other hand, fought with a clarity and purpose that bordered on the mechanical. He had been trained to exploit weakness, to anticipate hesitation, and to strike with precision. The Jedi fell, leaving Maul with his first true taste of victory against the order he had been raised to despise. Sidious's reaction to Maul's success was as measured as ever. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of a job well done. Instead, Sidious pressed him harder, pushing him to refine his skills and improve upon his performance. For every victory Maul achieved, there was always the unspoken expectation that he could and should do better. The missions continued, each one more challenging than the last. Maul was sent to desolate worlds, bustling trade hubs, and secretive enclaves, always tasked with eliminating those who stood in Sidious's way. Each encounter with a Jedi provided valuable lessons. Maul learned to adapt to their fighting styles, to anticipate their reliance on the Force, and to counter their defensive techniques. These duels became opportunities to sharpen his instincts and deepen his understanding of the dark side. Despite the escalating difficulty of his assignments, Maul never questioned Sidious's orders. His loyalty was absolute, driven by a combination of fear, respect, and the burning desire to prove himself. Every success further cemented his place at Sidious's side, and every victory against a Jedi felt like a step closer to fulfilling the destiny he had been promised. Yet beneath the surface, Maul's encounters with the Jedi began to shape him in ways even Sidious might not have anticipated. He saw their resolve, their commitment to their code, and occasionally, their compassion. It did not weaken his hatred, but it deepened his understanding of the enemy. Each Jedi he defeated became another piece of the puzzle, another step in unraveling the Order's weaknesses. Maul's reputation grew quietly. Among the galaxy's underworld, whispers of a shadowy enforcer spread, a figure who struck with precision and disappeared without a trace. Sidious ensured that these rumors remained vague, allowing Maul to operate under the radar while maintaining the aura of fear that surrounded the Sith. Through these missions, Maul's transformation was complete. No longer just a weapon forged in the crucible of pain, he had become a predator, a hunter who relished the pursuit as much as the kill. His victories were not just proof of his strength, they were the foundation of his identity. In the shadows, Maul thrived, knowing that each confrontation brought him closer to the ultimate goal of the Sith, the destruction of the Jedi Order. The creation of a lightsaber is a defining moment for any Force-sensitive being. For Maul, the process was far more than a rite of passage. It was an act of self-definition. Under Darth Sidious's relentless guidance, the construction of his weapon became a test of skill, willpower, and the mastery of the dark side. It was not just about creating a tool for combat, it was about forging an extension of himself. Sidious provided little instruction beyond the basic requirements. "Your weapon must reflect your strength," he said, his tone cold and impersonal. "It must be unique, as you are unique. Let it speak for you in battle." That was all Maul needed. His mind immediately set to work, drawing from the lessons he had learned and the anger that burned within him. The weapon that took shape was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Maul designed a double-bladed lightsaber, an echo of ancient Sith lords who had wielded such devices in their crusades against the Jedi. The choice was bold, even dangerous. A double-bladed saber demanded unparalleled precision and control, as it could just as easily harm its wielder as their opponent. For Maul, this challenge was not a deterrent. It was the point. The weapon would symbolize his mastery, a testament to his ability to command chaos with precision. Crafting the saber was a meticulous process. Maul worked alone, his hands steady despite the complexity of the task. He scavenged parts from various sources, piecing them together with an engineer's precision. The hilt was elongated to accommodate the dual emitters, its black and silver design simple yet menacing. Every detail was deliberate, from the alignment of the kyber crystals to the placement of the activation switches. The crystals themselves were key. Sidious provided two, each steeped in the dark side of the Force. Maul meditated over them for hours, pouring his anger and hatred into the crystals until they burned with a crimson glow. The process was grueling, testing not only his connection to the Force, but also his endurance. By the time he finished, the crystals pulsed with his essence, their energy a reflection of his inner turmoil. When the saber was complete, Maul ignited it for the first time. The twin blades erupted with a hiss, their red glow bathing the room in an eerie light. The weapon hummed with a feral energy, as if alive and eager for combat. Maul stood in the center of the chamber, spinning the saber with practiced ease. The movements felt natural, as though the weapon had always been a part of him. Sidious observed from the shadows, his expression unreadable. He did not offer praise, but the faint nod he gave was enough to convey his approval. Maul's creation was a success, not just in design, but in what it represented. The double-bladed saber was more than a weapon. It was a declaration of intent. It symbolized Maul's commitment to the Sith Order, his readiness to face any challenge, and his unwavering belief in the path Sidious had set before him. Maul wasted no time mastering his new weapon. He trained relentlessly, perfecting the saber's unique combat style. The dual blades required constant awareness and balance, punishing any lapse in focus. Maul embraced the challenge, knowing that every swing, every parry, brought him closer to the perfection he sought. The saber became an extension of his body, its movements flowing seamlessly with his own. The weapon's first test in battle was swift and brutal. Maul's enemies were unprepared for the ferocity of his attacks, the saber's twin blades cutting through their defenses with ease. The double-bladed lightsaber became as much a symbol of fear as it was a tool of destruction. Its crimson glow would mark Maul's presence on countless battlefields, a warning to those who dared stand against him. Through the creation of his saber, Maul solidified his identity. He was no longer just an apprentice or a servant of the dark side. He was a weapon in his own right, honed to perfection and ready to carve his place in the galaxy. With the double-bladed lightsaber in hand, Maul was prepared for the battles to come, each one bringing him closer to the destiny he believed was his. The mission was simple on the surface: intercept a Jedi Knight investigating reports of Sith activity in the Outer Rim. Sidious provided no further details, no strategic insights. Maul was given only the target's name and the location, a barren, windswept moon far from any semblance of civilization. It was clear this wasn't just about the mission. This was a test. Maul arrived at the designated location without fanfare. The desolate terrain stretched out in every direction, jagged rocks casting long shadows under the pale light of the system's twin suns. He waited in silence, cloaked in the dark side, his double-bladed lightsaber resting at his side. The anticipation was electric, a mixture of eagerness and calculated focus. He had faced opponents before, but this would be different. This would be a Jedi. When the Jedi arrived, Maul observed him carefully. The man was older, experienced, his movements steady and deliberate. His lightsaber hung loosely at his side, unlit but ready. He radiated calm, a stark contrast to the storm of anger and hatred building within Maul. They exchanged no words. None were necessary. Their confrontation was inevitable. The fight began with a sudden explosion of movement. Maul ignited his saber, the crimson blades casting a sinister glow across the rocky landscape. The Jedi's blue blade snapped to life in response, and the two clashed in a flurry of sparks and humming energy. Maul pressed the attack, his strikes fast and relentless. His weapons spun and arced with deadly precision, forcing the Jedi onto the defensive. Despite Maul's ferocity, the Jedi held his ground. His movements were measured, his defenses nearly impenetrable. He countered Maul's aggression with calculated precision, exploiting openings with quick, efficient strikes. For the first time, Maul felt the weight of what he was up against. This was not a sparring match. This was life or death. The battle raged across the moon's surface, each combatant adapting to the other's style. Maul's training and physical prowess gave him an edge, but the Jedi's experience and mastery of the Force evened the odds. As the fight wore on, Maul began to feel the strain. His anger drove him, fueling his attacks, but it also clouded his judgment. The Jedi exploited this, using Maul's aggression against him, forcing him to overextend and leave himself vulnerable. It was a misstep by the Jedi that turned the tide. A stumble on loose terrain gave Maul the opening he needed. With a swift, spinning strike, he disarmed the Jedi, sending the blue saber clattering across the ground. Maul didn't hesitate. He delivered the killing blow, his crimson blade cutting cleanly through his opponent. The Jedi fell, his body crumpling to the ground, lifeless. Maul stood over the fallen Jedi, his chest heaving with exertion. Victory should have felt sweet, but it was tempered by the realization of how close he had come to failure. The fight had exposed weaknesses, vulnerabilities he hadn't known he possessed. His anger had nearly consumed him, pushing him toward recklessness. He had won, but not without cost. When he returned to Sidious, Maul found no solace in his master's reaction. There was no praise, no acknowledgement of his victory. Instead, Sidious focused on Maul's mistakes, dissecting the battle with cold precision. "You let your emotions control you," Sidious said, his tone cutting. "You must learn to channel them, not be consumed by them." Maul listened in silence, his fists clenched. He understood the lesson, even as it stung. The fight had proven his strength, but it had also shown him how much further he had to go. He had tasted victory, but he now understood that survival in the galaxy would demand more than brute force and rage. As he left Sidious's presence, Maul's resolve hardened. The battle had not diminished his hatred, it had refined it. The Jedi were no longer abstract enemies. They were real, and they were formidable. Maul would face them again, and when he did, he vowed he would be stronger, faster, and more prepared. His first blood was only the beginning. Darth Sidious's ambitions had always extended beyond the Jedi. He understood that the galaxy was not just a battlefield for Force users, but a tangled web of politics, power, and criminal enterprise. The Sith could not rise to dominance by strength alone. They needed leverage in every corner of the galaxy. It was with this understanding that Sidious began introducing Maul to the galaxy's criminal underworld, a realm as ruthless and treacherous as the Sith's own. Maul's first assignments were subtle, almost mundane compared to his confrontations with Jedi. He was sent to oversee trade deals in lawless territories, negotiations that often involved spice runners, smugglers, and slavers. Sidious ensured these tasks were cloaked in secrecy, their significance buried beneath layers of deception. To the galaxy at large, the Sith were still a whisper, not yet a declared threat. Maul quickly learned that the underworld operated by its own rules. Strength and intimidation were valuable, but loyalty was rare, and betrayal was a currency. The beings he encountered, crime lords, bounty hunters, and mercenaries, were unpredictable and dangerous, driven by greed rather than ideology. Maul's initial disdain for these individuals was palpable, but Sidious reminded him of their utility. "Control the underworld," his master said, "and you control the chaos." One of Maul's early missions involved the Black Sun, a sprawling syndicate with influence stretching from the core worlds to the outer rim. The syndicate had grown too bold, interfering with operations Sidious wished to remain undisturbed. Maul was sent to remind them of their place. His approach was swift and brutal. He infiltrated their stronghold under the cover of darkness, his lightsaber carving through guards with surgical precision. When he reached the syndicate's leaders, he gave them a choice: submit or be destroyed. The Black Sun capitulated, but the message was clear. Maul was not a negotiator. He was a force of nature, a reminder of the consequences of defiance. The syndicate's submission marked the beginning of Maul's growing reputation in the underworld. Whispers of the shadowy enforcer spread, though few dared to speak his name aloud. Sidious observed Maul's progress with calculated interest. These missions were not just about consolidating power. They were a test of Maul's ability to navigate a world that thrived on treachery. The Sith Lord knew that brute force alone would not secure their ultimate victory. Maul needed to understand the subtleties of manipulation, the art of bending others to his will without revealing his hand. Over time, Maul began to see the value in this approach. The underworld's chaos could be weaponized, its players turned into unwitting pawns in the Sith's grand design. He adapted to the environment, blending his raw power with a growing understanding of strategy. He learned to speak the language of the underworld, not with words, but with calculated actions that spoke volumes. Yet beneath his growing proficiency Maul's resentment simmered. He was a warrior, trained to battle Jedi and reclaim the Sith's dominance, not to skulk in the shadows among criminals. Sidious, ever the master of control, used this frustration to drive Maul further. "Every blade has an edge," he told his apprentice. "This is how yours is sharpened." Each mission pushed Maul closer to the realization that the galaxy was far more complex than the binary conflict of Jedi versus Sith. The underworld was a battlefield of its own, one where power was defined not by the Force, but by control over resources, influence, and fear. It was a realm where even the smallest ripple could cause waves, and Maul was learning to create those ripples with precision. As his reputation in the criminal underworld grew, so too did his understanding of its potential. Maul began to see the underworld not as a distraction, but as a tool, a chaotic, unpredictable force that, when harnessed correctly, could be as devastating as any lightsaber. For Maul, this was a new kind of warfare, one fought not just with blades but with shadows, and he was becoming a master of both. Darth Maul's role as Sidious's enforcer was one of precision and secrecy. His existence was a carefully guarded secret, known to only a few. Even within the shadowy corridors of Sith influence, Maul's name was rarely uttered. Sidious ensured that his apprentice operated as a ghost, a figure whose actions could shift the balance of power without leaving a trace of the Sith's hand. This anonymity was not just for show, it was strategic. The Sith, though growing in influence, remained hidden from the Jedi. Every move was calculated to maintain their secrecy while eroding the structures of the Republic from within. Maul's missions were critical to this effort, targeting individuals and factions who either posed a threat to Sidious's plans or could be exploited to further them. Maul was sent to worlds most would never dare visit, places like Nar Shaddaa, where danger lurked in every shadow, and Raxus Prime, a toxic wasteland where treachery was as common as the smog. On each mission, Maul operated with the cold efficiency of a predator. He struck quickly, leaving no survivors to tell the tale. His double-bladed lightsaber was as much a symbol of terror as it was a weapon, its crimson glow a fleeting sight for those who crossed him. Yet Maul's work was not limited to destruction. Sidious often tasked him with subtle manipulations, securing alliances, undermining rivals, or planting seeds of discord among groups that could destabilize the Republic's foundations. These tasks tested Maul's patience and restraint, qualities he had little use for in combat, but began to appreciate in the realm of subterfuge. He learned to act without revealing his full strength, to leave behind whispers of fear rather than definitive proof. One mission in particular showcased Maul's growing mastery of these skills. Sidious sent him to deal with a powerful trade magnate who controlled a network vital to the Republic's supply chains. The target was not to be killed outright. Instead, he was to be coerced into compliance, his loyalty ensured through fear and manipulation. Maul infiltrated the magnate's fortress, bypassing its defenses with ease. In a calculated display of force, he eliminated the man's guards but left the magnate alive, surrounded by the carnage Maul had wrought. The message was clear. Obedience was the only option. Despite the success of such missions, Maul found little satisfaction in them. He longed for open battle, for the thrill of combat against worthy opponents. Operating in the shadows felt beneath him, a task suited for spies, not a warrior of his caliber. This frustration festered, though he dared not voice it. Sidious's will was absolute, and Maul understood the consequences of defiance. As Maul's legend grew in the underworld, so too did the fear he inspired. He became a figure of myth, a shadowy enforcer whose motives were unknowable and whose presence signaled doom. This fear served Sidious's purposes well, sowing chaos and uncertainty while maintaining the Sith's invisibility. To those who encountered him, Maul was not a man but a force, a phantom whose red blades cut through the galaxy's darkest corners. Yet Maul's secrecy also isolated him. He had no allies, no peers, only the distant approval of a master who viewed him as a tool rather than a partner. This isolation deepened Maul's reliance on the dark side, his anger and hatred the only constants in his life. They fueled him, sharpening his focus and driving him forward, even as he began to question what lay at the end of this path. Through it all, Maul remained loyal. He knew no other way. Sidious had given him purpose, had shaped him into the weapon he was. But as Maul's missions grew more complex and his influence expanded, the seeds of something new began to take root. A sense of ambition that was his own, separate from his master's designs. For now, it was only a whisper, buried beneath layers of loyalty and obedience. But in the shadows, Maul was beginning to see the edges of a destiny that might not be entirely Sidious's to control. The sands of Tatooine had barely settled from their first encounter, when Darth Maul tracked his quarry to the peaceful planet of Naboo. This was no longer a mission conducted in secrecy. For the first time, Maul would reveal the Sith's resurgence to the Jedi. Darth Sidious's grand plan required a decisive strike, and Maul was the weapon chosen to deliver it. The conflict began in the capital city of Theed, where Naboo's Queen Amidala sought to reclaim her throne from the Trade Federation's occupation. Amid the chaos of the invasion, Maul emerged, his dark presence announced with the ominous hum of his double-bladed lightsaber. He stood alone, his red and black tattoos stark against the regal setting, the very embodiment of the dark side's power. Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi were waiting. The Jedi Masters, pillars of calm and control, prepared to confront this new threat. For Maul, the confrontation was not just a battle. It was an opportunity to test himself against the Order that had long been the bane of the Sith. The moment their blades clashed, it was clear this duel would shape the galaxy's future. The battle spanned the elegant halls and labyrinthine corridors of Theed's royal palace, a stark contrast to the primal ferocity of the combatants. Maul fought with a style that was both precise and relentless, each strike from his twin blades designed to overwhelm and disorient. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, fighting as a team, countered with discipline and unity, their movements in perfect harmony. Maul's strength lay in his unpredictability. His acrobatics and unorthodox techniques forced the Jedi to constantly adapt. Yet, as the fight wore on, Maul began to single out Qui-Gon, sensing the elder Jedi's wisdom and calm as the greater threat. The duel became a dance of strategy and aggression, with Maul leading the Jedi deeper into the palace's reactor core. The final moments of the duel were seared into galactic memory. Maul's calculated use of the environment separated Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, isolating the master from his apprentice. Behind the flickering energy barriers, Obi-Wan could only watch as Maul and Qui-Gon clashed in a brutal exchange. Maul's relentless focus on Qui-Gon culminated in a devastating blow, a swift strike to the chest that ended the Jedi Master's life. For Maul, victory seemed assured, but Obi-Wan, fueled by his grief and determination, leapt back into the fray. The young Jedi's ferocity caught Maul off guard, pushing him to the brink. Yet, Maul's overconfidence proved his undoing. In a moment of vulnerability, Obi-Wan used the Force to retrieve his fallen master's lightsaber, delivering a decisive strike that bisected Maul and sent him plummeting into the depths of the reactor shaft. To the galaxy, Maul's death marked the end of the Sith's return. The Jedi believed they had vanquished this phantom menace, unaware that his fall was not the end. Maul's hatred, his sheer will to survive, and the dark side's grip on him would not allow him to perish. In the shadows of the galaxy, a new chapter of his story was about to begin. But for now, the duel of fates left an indelible scar, a reminder of the power and danger the Sith still wielded. Darth Maul's fall into the reactor shaft on Naboo should have marked the end of his story. His body, severed at the waist, tumbled into the void, disappearing from sight as the energy of the battle faded. For anyone else, such a fate would have been final. But Maul was not just anyone. He was forged in the fires of the dark side, his very existence fueled by a hatred so potent it defied the boundaries of life and death. Maul's descent ended in agony. He found himself clinging to the remnants of his broken body, the pain radiating through every fiber of his being. Yet even as his physical form failed him, his mind burned with a single thought: vengeance. The image of Obi-Wan Kenobi, standing triumphant over him, seared itself into his memory, a spark that reignited his will to survive. The dark side became his lifeline. It wrapped around him like a shroud, amplifying his hatred and twisting it into a force of raw power. Through sheer will, Maul clung to life, dragging himself through the refuse and decay of the reactor's lower levels. His survival was as much a testament to his mastery of the Force as it was to his refusal to accept defeat. Pain became his companion, a constant reminder of his humiliation, but also a source of strength. Maul's journey took him to Lotho Minor, a desolate junkyard world where the galaxy's refuse was sent to rot. It was here, among the endless heaps of scrap and toxic fumes, that Maul's hatred kept him alive. He scavenged the remnants of machines and cobbled together a grotesque spider-like apparatus to replace his lost legs. The crude contraption allowed him to move, though it offered little solace. His existence was one of torment, his thoughts consumed by a singular desire: to find Obi-Wan Kenobi and exact his revenge. Years passed in isolation, and Maul's mind began to fracture under the weight of his anger and despair. He spoke to himself in the darkness, replaying the events of his defeat over and over. The once disciplined apprentice of Darth Sidious devolved into a creature of instinct and obsession. Yet even in his madness, the dark side sustained him. It whispered to him, fueling his hatred and ensuring that his spirit would not break entirely. It was through sheer coincidence, or perhaps the will of the Force, that Maul's existence was eventually discovered. His brother, Savage Opress, guided by the Night Sister Mother Talzin, tracked him to Lotho Minor. The reunion was anything but tender. Savage found not the fearsome warrior he had admired, but a shattered shadow of his former self. Yet even in his broken state, Maul's hatred burned brighter than ever. Mother Talzin's dark magics restored Maul, both physically and mentally. She replaced his crude legs with cybernetic limbs, sleek and powerful, and mended his fractured mind. But what emerged from her rituals was not the Darth Maul of old. This was a being reshaped by suffering and hatred, a creature whose sole purpose was vengeance. His survival was a defiance of nature, a triumph of the dark side, and a prelude to the chaos he would soon unleash. Maul's time in the Abyss had changed him. He was no longer merely Sidious's apprentice or a weapon of the Sith. He had become something far more dangerous, a force unbound, driven by a hatred so pure it could not be extinguished. And as he prepared to re-enter the galaxy, one thing was certain: Maul's story was far from over. Lotho Minor was not a place where life flourished. The planet was a graveyard of industry, its surface covered in endless heaps of metallic refuse and toxic sludge. The air was thick with smog, the kind that burned the lungs and turned the light of the sun into a dull, sickly hue. It was here, amidst this wasteland of rot and decay, that Darth Maul was cast by the whims of fate. His arrival was marked by pain and desperation. The once proud Sith apprentice had been reduced to a fragment of his former self. His lower body was gone, replaced by makeshift spider-like limbs crafted from discarded machinery. The contraption clattered and creaked with every movement, a grotesque reminder of his fall. Yet Maul's hatred kept him moving. It was his lifeline, the only thing tethering him to existence in this hostile place. Survival on Lotho Minor was a brutal test. The planet was home to scavengers and predators, creatures as twisted as the landscape itself. Maul navigated this world with the instincts of a cornered animal. He hunted for scraps to sustain his body and fought off those who sought to prey on him. Each day was a battle, each night a restless torment filled with memories of his defeat. His mind began to fray under the weight of his suffering, but his hatred for Obi-Wan Kenobi burned brightly, a constant that never wavered. Time on Lotho Minor became meaningless. Days bled into years, each one dragging Maul further into madness. He built a nest in the depths of the junkyards, a twisted cavern of wires and scrap metal that mirrored his own fractured psyche. Here, he muttered to himself, replaying the duel on Naboo over and over in his mind. He spoke of Kenobi as if the Jedi were there with him, his words a venomous mixture of anger and despair. Despite his descent into insanity, Maul was not entirely forgotten. Word of a mysterious figure lurking in the depths of Lotho Minor began to spread among the few who ventured there. Some described him as a monster, a half-machine abomination with burning yellow eyes. Others spoke of his unmatched ferocity, of his ability to tear through attackers with inhuman speed and precision. These stories were passed along in hushed tones, warnings to avoid the shadowed corners of the junkyard planet. Maul's isolation ended when his brother, Savage Opress, found him. Guided by the dark magics of Mother Talzin, Savage descended into Lotho Minor's depths and faced the creature his brother had become. Their reunion was raw and violent. Maul lashed out at first, his mind too fractured to recognize Savage. But as the darkness enveloped them, a spark of recognition ignited. The bond between brothers, forged in the nights of Dathomir, could not be extinguished so easily. Savage brought Maul back to Dathomir, where Mother Talzin's dark sorcery began the process of restoring him. His spider-like legs were replaced with more advanced cybernetics, and his mind, though scarred, was pieced back together. But the years on Lotho Minor had left their mark. Maul emerged from his exile not as the Sith apprentice he once was, but as a being transformed by suffering and hatred. On Lotho Minor, Maul had been a monster in every sense of the word, but now he was something far more dangerous, a monster with purpose. As he prepared to re-enter the galaxy, his heart was filled with only one thought: revenge. And the galaxy would soon learn that no shadow was darker than the one cast by Darth Maul. The dark depths of Lotho Minor had become Darth Maul's prison, a place where his shattered body and fractured mind festered in isolation. But across the galaxy, his story had not been forgotten. On Dathomir, the Night Sister matriarch, Mother Talzin, had not relinquished her claim to Maul, nor had she abandoned her vision for the power her sons could wield. Her plans began to unfold as she sent Savage Opress, Maul's younger brother and her chosen enforcer, on a mission to find him. Savage's arrival on Lotho Minor was not the act of a hero seeking to save a fallen sibling. It was the call of blood and duty, a task handed down by a mother who saw in Maul a critical piece of her grand design. Savage himself was a towering figure, infused with Night Sister magics and hardened by the harsh realities of servitude under Dooku and his own battles across the galaxy. He was a being of immense power, but what he found on Dathomir tested even his resolve. The Maul Savage encountered was more beast than man. His once fearsome form was twisted and hunched, supported by the grotesque spider-like apparatus he had constructed to replace his lost legs. His mind was a labyrinth of pain and anger, consumed by years of isolation and the obsessive hatred for Obi-Wan Kenobi that had kept him alive. Savage's approach was met with feral hostility. Maul did not recognize his brother at first, lashing out in blind rage, his cybernetic limbs thrashing against the one being who had come to help him. Despite Maul's madness, the bond of blood was not so easily severed. Savage persisted, calling out to the brother he had grown up with on Dathomir, evoking memories of their shared past. Slowly, recognition flickered in Maul's yellow, rage-filled eyes. It was not a moment of clarity, but a spark, a faint glimmer of the man he had once been buried beneath the layers of torment and hatred. Savage brought Maul back to Dathomir, carrying him from the depths of Dathomir like a prize reclaimed from the abyss. Mother Talzin awaited their return, her dark presence filling the Night Sister's lair with an oppressive weight. She looked upon the broken form of her son with both pity and purpose. To her, Maul's suffering was not an end, but a crucible, a transformation that would forge him into something even more powerful. The ritual that followed was a display of Night Sister sorcery at its most potent. Green mist swirled around Maul's twisted body, the air alive with ancient incantations. Talzin channeled her power into him, rebuilding what had been lost. The grotesque spider limbs were replaced with sleek cybernetics, a set of legs that gave Maul a new sense of power and stability. The agony of his physical transformation was mirrored by the mending of his shattered mind. Talzin's magic pieced together the fragments of his psyche, reshaping him into a being no longer bound by the limitations of his former self. When the ritual ended, Maul stood transformed. His body was whole again, his mind sharp and clear, but something fundamental had changed. The years of suffering and isolation had left their mark, etching themselves into the core of his being. This was not the Maul who had served Sidious with unquestioning loyalty, nor was it the apprentice who had fallen on Naboo. He was a creature forged in the crucible of his own hatred, a dark reflection of the willpower that had kept him alive against all odds. For Savage, this was a reunion with a brother who was both familiar and alien. The Maul who emerged from Talzin's ritual was a force of pure determination, his mind set on a singular purpose: revenge. He spoke of Obi-Wan Kenobi with a venom that filled the air, his hatred now a sharpened blade aimed at the Jedi who had left him for dead. But beneath this obsession, there was something more, a hunger for power, for control, and for a legacy that would outlive even the Sith's ancient schemes. Mother Talzin watched with satisfaction as her sons stood united before her. She had restored Maul not out of sentiment, but out of strategy. Together, Maul and Savage represented an unholy alliance of strength and cunning, a weapon she could wield against the galaxy's forces of order. But even Talzin, in her wisdom, could not fully predict the path Maul would take. He had been broken and rebuilt, but his destiny was now his own, and the galaxy would soon feel the wrath of a being who had clawed his way back from the abyss. Darth Maul had emerged from the shadows of Dathomir, not as a defeated remnant of the Sith, but as something entirely new, a force unshackled from the strictures of his former master's plans. The hatred that had kept him alive now served as the foundation for a purpose more personal and dangerous. Revenge was still the core of his existence, but Maul had grown beyond the blind pursuit of vengeance. He was rebuilding himself, not just in body, but in spirit, with a clarity born from suffering. His rebirth on Dathomir had left him with more than new cybernetics and a repaired mind. Mother Talzin's rituals had reconnected him with the latent power of the dark side, amplifying his abilities and sharpening his focus. Where once he had been a weapon wielded by Darth Sidious, Maul now saw himself as a force to wield his own destiny. The galaxy that had forgotten him would soon remember his name. Maul's first steps were cautious. He knew that his survival and resurgence could not go unnoticed for long. His former master, Sidious, would not allow loose ends to wander the galaxy, and the Jedi remained vigilant against any whispers of the Sith. To secure his foothold, Maul turned his attention to building a network of power that extended beyond the limitations of the Sith's shadowy schemes. He needed resources, allies, and a platform from which to launch his plans. Savage Opress became both his companion and his enforcer. The bond between the brothers, strengthened by their shared connection to Mother Talzin, made them a formidable pair. Savage's brute strength complemented Maul's calculating intellect, and together they began carving a path through the criminal underworld. Maul's goals were not limited to petty crime or quick gains. Each alliance he formed and every territory he claimed served a larger vision: to create a power base that would challenge both the Jedi and the Sith. His reputation as a relentless and merciless force spread quickly. Maul's enemies learned to fear his methods: precision strikes that left no survivors and alliances forged through intimidation and manipulation. His encounters were often punctuated by moments of chilling clarity. Maul was not merely interested in conquest for its own sake. He sought to upend the very structures that had left him broken. His actions were deliberate, each one a piece of a puzzle only he could see. Throughout this period, Maul's obsession with Obi-Wan Kenobi remained at the forefront of his thoughts. The Jedi was a symbol of everything Maul had lost and everything he sought to reclaim. But Maul's approach to revenge had evolved. He no longer rushed headlong toward conflict. Instead, he began to orchestrate events that would eventually force Kenobi to confront him on his terms. Maul was no longer a weapon. He was the hand that wielded the blade, a puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. Maul's journey toward this new purpose revealed the depth of his resilience and the breadth of his ambition. He had been cast aside, left to rot, but he had returned with a will sharpened by suffering. The galaxy was vast, its systems chaotic, but Maul saw in its disorder an opportunity. His story, once thought ended, had become a warning to all who underestimated the power of survival, driven by pure, unrelenting hatred. Maul's campaign for revenge began as a calculated storm, orchestrated with the precision of a tactician and the ferocity of a warrior. Alongside Savage Opress, his loyal and equally dangerous brother, Maul unleashed chaos that sent ripples across the galaxy. Their shared bond and Talzin's influence gave their actions an almost ritualistic purpose, each strike a step toward reclaiming Maul's position as a force of terror. The Jedi became the first targets in Maul's warpath. To Maul, they symbolized the structure that had allowed his suffering and discarded him as unimportant. His hatred for Obi-Wan Kenobi remained his driving force, but Maul was nothing if not strategic. He understood that to draw Kenobi out, he needed to send a message, one that the Jedi Order could not ignore. Maul and Savage's first strike was swift and brutal, aimed at a remote Jedi outpost. The pair descended upon their unsuspecting targets with the precision of seasoned predators. Savage's raw strength broke the lines of defense, while Maul's refined skill finished those who resisted. It wasn't just a massacre, it was a declaration. Survivors spoke of the yellow-eyed Zabrak wielding a double-bladed lightsaber, a weapon long thought to have fallen silent on Naboo. For the Jedi Council, It was a chilling revelation. For Maul, it was the beginning of a larger plan. As the galaxy reeled from the resurgence of a supposed phantom, Maul turned his sights on another adversary, Sidious. He knew that his former master would not take kindly to Maul's reappearance, let alone his defiance. But Maul's challenge wasn't born of arrogance, it was necessity. Sidious had cast him aside, deeming him a failure unworthy of the Sith legacy. Now, Maul sought to prove that his survival and ambition placed him above Sidious's control. To build his strength, Maul and Savage targeted key nodes of power within the criminal underworld. They didn't just raid, they recruited. Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, and other factions found themselves either swearing loyalty or facing destruction. Maul wielded the same fear and manipulation he had learned under Sidious, but now it served his own purposes. These alliances fortified his growing army, a force he knew he would need to challenge both Jedi and Sith. As their campaign grew, Maul's methods became darker, each move laced with a personal vendetta. His understanding of fear and control turned every battlefield into a stage, where he was both director and star. Savage's brute force complemented Maul's precision, their combined presence an unstoppable wave of destruction. But Maul's intentions were never simple violence. Every act of terror was carefully designed to bait his enemies, especially Kenobi. Maul's resurgence was more than a personal war. It was a testament to his evolution. No longer a servant of another's will, Maul became a singular force, reshaping the galaxy's power structures to align with his vengeance. And in the shadows of his victories, the Jedi and Sidious alike began to prepare for the reckoning that Maul was bringing to their doors. Maul understood that to exact revenge on his enemies and achieve lasting power, brute strength alone would not suffice. The galaxy's political and criminal undercurrents had to be manipulated, and to do so, he needed allies, even if they were temporary. With Savage Oprys by his side, Maul began assembling what would become the Shadow Collective, an empire of crime that would rival even the Republic and Separatists in its reach. The foundation of the Shadow Collective began with the Black Sun. This infamous criminal syndicate had dominated smuggling and assassinations for years, operating from the volcanic fortress of Mustafar. Maul, flanked by Savage, approached their ruling council not with diplomacy, but with intimidation. When the council hesitated to pledge their loyalty, Savage delivered a chilling display of force, ending their lives in an instant. The survivors, faced with the choice of submission or annihilation, quickly fell in line. From there, Maul turned to the Pikes, masters of the spice trade. Their control over the galaxy's lucrative narcotic supply made them a valuable asset. Unlike the Black Sun, the Pikes were more pragmatic, recognizing the advantage of aligning with Maul's growing power. They offered their resources willingly, though Maul's reputation left little doubt about the consequences of betrayal. The Hutts, with their vast wealth and influence, proved more challenging. Their crime families were notoriously self-serving, reluctant to bow to any external force. Maul and Savage entered the Hutt council chambers on Nal Hutta with the same ruthless determination that had subdued the Black Sun. When the Hutts resisted, Maul unleashed his wrath, destroying their defenses and killing those who dared defy him. The surviving Hutts, understanding they had no other option, agreed to join the collective. Each faction brought unique strengths to the Shadow Collective. The Black Sun's assassins, the Pikes' smuggling networks, and the Hutt's financial clout created a power structure unlike anything the galaxy had seen. But this was no mere coalition of criminals. Under Maul's leadership, the collective operated with a singular purpose: He imposed order on the chaos, directing their combined resources toward his ultimate goals. Maul's ability to unify these disparate factions showcased not just his strength, but his cunning. He offered them a vision of dominance, a galaxy where they ruled in the shadows, unchallenged by Jedi or Sith. Yet beneath this facade of mutual gain, Maul's true motivations remained deeply personal. The Shadow Collective was a means to an end, a tool to dismantle the power structures that had wronged him. The criminal underworld soon began to shift under Maul's control. Rival syndicates either joined or were obliterated, leaving the Shadow Collective as the dominant force. Their operations expanded, from spice running to arms dealing, creating a vast network that stretched across the Outer Rim and beyond. The galaxy's law enforcement agencies were powerless against such coordination, and even the Jedi struggled to track the Collective's activities. In forging the Shadow Collective, Maul demonstrated an evolution in his approach to power. No longer the servant of another's design, he was now a ruler in his own right, shaping the galaxy's destiny to suit his vengeance. But while the Collective grew in strength, it also became a reflection of Maul's own fractured psyche, a force held together by fear, ambition, and the relentless drive of its leader. For now, it served his purposes, but the cracks in its foundation were already beginning to form. Maul's path to dominance led him to Mandalore, a planet synonymous with strength and a rich history of warrior culture. For Maul, Mandalore represented more than conquest. It was a strategic stronghold and a stage for his ever-expanding ambitions. His rise to power there would test the loyalty of his Shadow Collective and his ability to bend ancient traditions to his will. The planet was fractured, its once unified people divided between Duchess Satine's pacifist government and the exiled Death Watch faction, led by Pre Vizsla. Vizsla's group sought to restore Mandalore's warrior legacy and reclaim their planet through force. Maul saw an opportunity in their desperation and approached Vizsla with a proposition. He offered the Shadow Collective's resources and Savage Oppress's muscle in exchange for mutual cooperation. Vizsla, ever calculating, agreed, though both leaders harbored private intentions of betrayal. Maul's alliance with Death Watch began with a coordinated campaign of chaos. The Shadow Collective's criminal syndicates launched a wave of attacks across Mandalore, plunging its cities into panic. These strikes were not random acts of violence, but carefully orchestrated moves designed to destabilize Satine's rule. As fear gripped the populace, Death Watch swept in as saviors, defeating the Shadow Collective's forces in staged battles. The plan worked flawlessly, and the people of Mandalore hailed Vizsla and his warriors as heroes. But Maul's ambitions did not end with Vizsla's rise. As Death Watch claimed victory, Maul saw the cracks forming in their alliance. Vizsla had no intention of sharing power, and Maul, ever the tactician, prepared for the inevitable betrayal. When Vizsla turned against him, imprisoning Maul and Savage, the Zabrak brothers responded with calculated precision. Maul invoked the ancient Mandalorian tradition of single combat to challenge Vizsla for leadership. The duel took place in the throne room of Sundari, the capital city, a spectacle of strength and skill that would echo through Mandalorian history. Vizsla, wielding the legendary Darksaber, fought with the ferocity of a seasoned warrior. His jetpack and arsenal of weapons gave him a distinct tactical advantage, but Maul's mastery of the Force and combat training proved insurmountable. The duel's conclusion was as brutal as it was decisive. Maul disarmed Vizsla, taking the Darksaber and delivering a fatal blow that left no doubt about the legitimacy of his victory. By Mandalorian law, Maul had claimed not just the weapon, but the leadership of Death Watch and the planet itself. However, his rule was immediately contested. Bo-Katan Kryze, a staunch traditionalist and loyalist to Mandalore's heritage, refused to accept an outsider as her leader. She and her faction, the Night Owls, rebelled against Maul, splintering Death Watch into rival factions. While Maul secured his position with fear and strategic appointments, including the installation of Prime Minister Almec as his puppet, his control was far from absolute. Maul's conquest of Mandalore was a bold and calculated move, demonstrating his ability to adapt and dominate even in the face of tradition and rebellion. Yet his actions also revealed the fragile foundation of power built on fear and division. For now, he sat on Mandalore's throne, but the shadow of rebellion and the specter of his former master loomed ever closer. Maul's rule over Mandalore, born of blood and manipulation, faced its greatest test when the Republic turned its attention to the warrior planet. The Clone Wars had reached a boiling point, and the Jedi, stretched thin across the galaxy, saw an opportunity to strike at one of the war's key instigators. With the Mandalorian resistance led by Bo-Katan Kryze calling for help, the Republic launched an invasion, setting the stage for the siege of Mandalore. The Republic's response was spearheaded by the 332nd Legion, a division of clones led by Commander Rex and former Jedi Ahsoka Tano. While no longer a member of the Order, Ahsoka's experience and connection to Mandalore's plight made her the ideal candidate to lead the assault. Her tactical brilliance and deep understanding of Maul's mindset would prove crucial as the Republic sought to dismantle his hold on the planet. The invasion began with precision. Republic gunships pierced Mandalore's skies, delivering legions of clone troopers into the urban battlefield of Sundari. The dome-encased city, once a beacon of neutrality, became a labyrinth of narrow streets and towering structures, perfect for the kind of aerial combat Mandalorians thrived on. Maul's loyal super commandos, dressed in red and black armor to reflect their allegiance, were well prepared. The battles that followed were brutal and relentless. Maul, ever the tactician, anticipated the Republic's arrival. He had fortified key positions within Sundari and set traps to exploit the overconfidence of his enemies. Yet, his preparations were not solely for defense. Maul sought to draw his enemies into a confrontation where he could gain the upper hand. He did not view the Republic as his primary adversary, but as pawns in a larger game, a game whose ultimate player was his former master, Darth Sidious. Ahsoka and Maul's eventual confrontation in the throne room of Sundari was a clash of ideologies as much as it was a battle of skill. Maul, confident and calculating, revealed the scope of his knowledge, warning Ahsoka of the impending doom that Sidious's grand plan would bring. He spoke of the Jedi's blindness, their failure to see the dark forces manipulating the galaxy. Ahsoka, steadfast and determined, rejected his vision, viewing his words as another attempt to sow chaos and doubt. Their duel was a spectacle, a whirlwind of lightsabers and force power that moved from the throne room to the city's skeletal support beams. Ahsoka's agility and resourcefulness matched Maul's raw power and precision. Despite his attempts to overpower her, Ahsoka's resolve proved unshakable. With the aid of the clones, she eventually subdued Maul, capturing him in a Mandalorian vault designed to contain Force wielders. The siege marked the end of Maul's reign over Mandalore but left the planet fractured. Bo-Katan's forces reclaimed control, but the cost was great, and the scars of Maul's influence would linger. For Maul, the defeat was not just a setback, it was a turning point. Captured and stripped of his power base, he now faced an uncertain fate as the galaxy hurtled toward the chaos of Order 66 and the rise of the Empire. The siege of Mandalore was not the conclusion of Maul's story, but the prelude to an even darker chapter. The rise of Maul as a galactic power player did not go unnoticed, least of all by Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith, who had once molded him into an instrument of terror. Sidious had long moved on from Maul, believing him dead and irrelevant. But Maul's growing influence, his creation of the Shadow Collective, and his conquest of Mandalore were threats Sidious could not ignore. The time had come for master and apprentice to meet again, not as teacher and student, but as enemies. The confrontation began with an ominous silence. Maul, ruling from Mandalore's throne room, sensed a disturbance in the Force, a shadow darker than any he had ever known. Sidious arrived with the measured confidence of a predator certain of its victory. Dressed in his Sith robes, his face an eerie mask of malice, he moved through Sondari as if the city itself bowed before him. His presence alone was enough to send tremors of fear through even the most hardened warriors. Maul and Savage Opress, united by blood and ambition, prepared to face the Dark Lord together. They were formidable, each a weapon honed by years of struggle and rage. But Sidious was no ordinary opponent. He was the architect of the galaxy's downfall, a master manipulator who wielded the dark side with unparalleled skill. As he entered the throne room, his presence seemed to sap the very air of warmth and hope. The ensuing duel was a masterclass in the destructive potential of the Force. Sidious, wielding two crimson blades, attacked with a ferocity and precision that seemed effortless. Maul and Savage fought as one, their combined strength pushing Sidious to unleash his full power. Lightsabers clashed in a blur of red, the sound echoing like thunder through the halls. But even together, the brothers were no match for the Dark Lord. Sidious's mastery of the Force was overwhelming. With a flick of his wrist, he sent Savage hurtling across the room, his body crashing into the stone walls with bone-shattering force. The Zabrak warrior fought valiantly, his raw strength and anger a testament to his Nightsister heritage, but Sidious's strikes were merciless. Savage fell, his final moments marked by defiance and the sorrow of unfulfilled potential. Maul, now alone, unleashed every ounce of his fury. He attacked with the desperation of someone who knew he was outmatched, but refused to yield. Sidious, ever the sadistic teacher, relished the battle, toying with Maul as if to remind him of his place. The Dark Lord's laughter, cold and mocking, cut through the chaos like a blade. In the end, Maul was brought to his knees, disarmed and defeated. Sidious, looking down at his former apprentice, declared him no longer a rival, but a pawn. He had no intention of killing Maul. Instead, he would use him, twisting his fate further to serve his own designs. The encounter reshaped the dynamics of power in the galaxy. Savage was dead, Maul was broken, and Sidious's dominance was once again undisputed. For Maul, the defeat was a bitter reminder of the cost of rebellion against a master who knew no equal. For Sidious, it was a satisfying demonstration of his unyielding control over the dark side and the galaxy itself. But in the shadows of his despair, Maul's will to survive remained unbroken, a spark that would ignite yet another chapter in his relentless pursuit of vengeance. Captured and utterly defeated, Maul's fall from power led him to a fate worse than death, imprisonment at the hands of the very master who had once molded him into a weapon of terror. Sidious, ever the architect of suffering, chose not to kill Maul outright. Instead, he consigned his former apprentice to the Spire, a maximum security facility on Stygian Prime, designed to contain even the most dangerous Force wielders. Here, Maul's torment would not just be physical but psychological, a crucible to reshape his ambitions. The Spire itself was a monolithic testament to Sidious's absolute control. Hidden away in the galaxy's recesses, it was a fortress of dark technology and oppressive design. Its walls seemed to hum with malice, and its corridors were silent save for the echoes of unseen torment. Maul was kept in isolation, his cell a small, sterile chamber designed to strip him of any comfort. Its walls were imbued with force-dampening properties, severing him from the power that had defined his existence. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as Maul sat alone in the suffocating void. The silence was unbearable, a weight pressing against his mind, amplifying every regret and failure. Sidious's parting words echoed in his thoughts, a mocking reminder of his insignificance. For the first time, Maul was forced to confront the totality of his defeat. He had been a ruler, a warrior, a symbol of the dark side's fury. Now he was nothing more than a pawn stripped of agency. But Maul was not one to surrender to despair. The anger that had sustained him through countless defeats began to stir once more. At first it was a flicker, a faint ember of defiance. He replayed every moment of his life, dissecting the choices that had led him here. His hatred for Sidious grew sharper, but alongside it, a new determination began to form. If the Sith had used him as a tool, then he would redefine his purpose. He would become more than a discarded apprentice. He would become the master of his own destiny. The physical torment was relentless. Guards subjected him to daily humiliations, and automated systems inflicted agonizing punishment for even the smallest defiance. Yet Maul welcomed the pain. Each blow, each jolt of energy, fueled his resolve. The dark side, though distant, was not gone. It whispered to him in his moments of agony, a reminder of the power that still lay within. He began to meditate, channeling his anger into focus, slowly rebuilding the mental fortitude that had once made him a formidable warrior. Maul's time in the Spire was not just about survival, it was about transformation. He realized that his ambitions needed to evolve. The galaxy was vast, its power structures complex. Sidious's grip was tightening, but cracks were beginning to show. The Jedi were spread thin, the Republic teetering on the brink of collapse. Maul knew that his path to revenge lay not in direct confrontation, but in manipulation. He would need allies, resources, and a strategy to exploit the chaos Sidious himself was creating. In the quiet of his cell, Maul began to plan. His thoughts turned to the Shadow Collective, the empire he had built from the remnants of the criminal underworld. It had fractured after his capture, but its foundation remained. If he could escape, he would reclaim his place among the galaxy's most dangerous figures. He envisioned a network of power that operated outside the Sith's control, a force that would rival even Sidious's grand design. By the time Maul's opportunity for escape presented itself, he was no longer the broken figure who had entered the Spire. He was reborn, his anger sharpened into a weapon, his ambitions recalibrated for the long game. The Spire had not defeated him, it had forged him anew. As he prepared to re-enter the galaxy, one thing was certain. Maul was no longer content to be a pawn. He would shape his destiny, and the galaxy would tremble in his wake. The Spire had held many prisoners over the years, but none like Maul. His confinement had stripped him of power and prestige, yet it failed to extinguish his will. For months, he endured the cold silence of isolation, sharpening his hatred into a tool for survival. It was only a matter of time before the cracks in his captivity aligned with his relentless cunning. Maul's opportunity came through the chaos of a galactic war that even the Spire could not escape. The shifting tides of conflict had drawn attention away from the prison, and the cracks in its security began to show. Using a combination of brute strength, deception, and his enduring connection to the dark side, Maul orchestrated his escape. Details of the incident remain scarce, shrouded in secrecy and rumor, but the aftermath left no doubt that it was meticulously planned. Guards were found incapacitated, systems overridden, and pathways cleared with the precision of a predator stalking its prey. The moment Maul set foot outside the spire, the galaxy seemed larger and more volatile than ever. The Republic and the Separatists were locked in a death spiral, and the Jedi Order was stretched thin. This chaos was not a setback for Maul, but an opportunity. It provided the perfect cover for his movements, allowing him to disappear into the shadows without a trace. Maul's first act of freedom was not one of vengeance, but survival. He scavenged for resources, piecing together a ship from discarded parts, and using his intimate knowledge of the galaxy's underworld to secure safe passage to the Outer Rim. Here, among the lawless worlds far from the Republic's influence, Maul began his transformation into something new. No longer bound by the Sith's doctrine, he embraced his identity as a rogue element, unshackled from the constraints of tradition. His wanderings took him to desolate moons and forgotten outposts, places where whispers of his name had faded into legend. These remote locations offered Maul the solitude he needed to refine his plans. He sought out ancient Sith relics, not for their power, but for the knowledge they held. Each artifact, each fragment of history, reinforced his understanding of the dark side and his role within it. Though Maul's movements were calculated, they were far from aimless. His singular purpose, to reclaim power and destroy those who had wronged him, guided every decision. He adopted a shadowy existence, operating from the periphery and avoiding direct confrontation. This approach allowed him to rebuild his strength, both physically and mentally, without drawing the attention of his enemies. Through his travels, Maul encountered individuals who would later become key to his resurgence. Mercenaries, smugglers, and outcasts were drawn to his aura of authority and danger. These connections, though tenuous at first, laid the groundwork for a network that would serve his ambitions. Maul understood that power in the galaxy was no longer about raw might. It was about influence, strategy, and the ability to exploit chaos. As Maul disappeared into the unknown, he became more than a fugitive. He was a shadow, a force waiting to re-emerge when the galaxy least expected it. The spire had been meant to break him, but it had only honed his resolve. Now free, Maul's journey of vengeance and domination was only beginning, and the galaxy would soon feel the weight of his return. Freedom from the spire reignited the fire that had smoldered within Maul since his defeat on Naboo. That fire burned hottest for Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Jedi who had taken everything from him. In Maul's mind, Kenobi was more than an adversary. He was the embodiment of unfinished business, the symbol of every failure and humiliation Maul had endured. This obsession consumed him, giving his wanderings a singular focus. Maul's search for Kenobi was meticulous and relentless, fueled by the dark side and a lifetime of cunning. He started by scouring the galaxy for clues, probing the underworld for whispers of a Jedi in hiding. The Clone Wars had scattered the Jedi Order, forcing its members into secrecy. But Maul knew Kenobi was no ordinary exile. His instincts told him that Kenobi would not fade quietly into obscurity. There was a reason he had survived while so many others had perished. The search was not without cost. Maul's reputation as a shadowy figure of the dark side preceded him, making it dangerous to move openly. He relied on intermediaries and hired operatives to dig through the galaxy's criminal networks. On Nar Shaddaa, a spice dealer spoke of a Jedi who had been seen in the Outer Rim years ago. On Tatooine, a moisture farmer mentioned a cloaked figure who carried a weapon that hummed with energy. Each lead was thin, but Maul followed them with unwavering determination. In his quest, Maul's anger and hatred intensified, warping his connection to the Force into something both powerful and unstable. His meditations were not serene moments of reflection, but stormy clashes with the echoes of his past. He reached out with the Force, sending ripples across the galaxy, hoping to provoke a response. Sometimes in the stillness of these meditations, he would feel Kenobi's presence, faint and distant, like a star obscured by clouds. These fleeting sensations only deepened Maul's fixation. The search was not purely solitary. Along the way, Maul encountered those who could aid his cause, though he trusted none of them fully. Mercenaries eager for credits and spies seeking favor provided him with information, but Maul kept them at arm's length. He knew that betrayal was always a possibility, and that his obsession could make him vulnerable. Each step brought Maul closer to Kenobi, but it also pushed him further into darkness. His hatred began to consume him in ways he had not anticipated. The more he searched, the more he realized that Kenobi was not merely a target. He was Maul's tether to purpose. Without Kenobi, Maul feared that his existence would lack meaning. This realization only heightened his desperation, turning his hunt into a quest not just for revenge, but for resolution. The galaxy, vast and chaotic, seemed to conspire against Maul's search, but he refused to relent. He was a creature of persistence and pain, driven by the knowledge that somewhere out there, Kenobi still lived, and Maul would find him, no matter the cost. The final confrontation he envisioned was not just a fight, it was the answer to a question that had haunted him for years. Until that moment came, Maul would remain the hunter, his purpose sharpened by every failure and every fleeting whisper of his elusive prey. Tatooine was a world of extremes, its endless dunes scorched by twin suns, and its nights chilled by desert winds. To many, it was a desolate, forgotten place, but for Maul, it was the culmination of years of searching. Every whisper, every fleeting trace had led him here, and the weight of that journey hung heavy as he arrived on this arid frontier. The sands seemed to shift beneath his feet, as if the planet itself resisted his presence, but Maul had never been one to heed warnings from nature or the Force. His ship landed far from the bustling hives of criminal activity. The silence of the desert wrapped around him like a shroud, a stark contrast to the chaos that had defined his life. Yet the stillness offered no solace. As Maul set foot on Tatooine, the Force stirred around him, its currents whispering of a long-awaited reckoning. He knew Kenobi was near, and the promise of their confrontation fueled his every step. Maul's search took him through the outskirts of small settlements, where moisture farmers and scavengers eked out meager existences. His presence was both a shadow and a storm, unsettling those who crossed his path. The locals, hardened by the harshness of the desert, recognized the danger in his gaze and offered little resistance to his probing questions. They spoke of a hermit, a man who kept to himself and was seen only in fleeting moments. It was enough. Maul followed these hints with the precision of a predator. The desert began to work against him as the twin suns bore down, their heat relentless. His mechanical legs struggled against the fine grains of sand, and the dry air clawed at his lungs. But the physical toll was nothing compared to the mental strain. Maul's mind, already battered by years of obsession and torment, began to fray further. The solitude amplified his inner demons, and memories of his past failures clawed at his consciousness. Visions of Sidious, Talzin, and Savage danced before his eyes, their voices a cruel chorus of doubts and accusations. Despite the unraveling edges of his sanity, Maul pressed on. His anger, his pain, and his sheer willpower became the driving forces that kept him moving. The whispers of the Force grew louder, guiding him toward a singular presence. Kenobi's aura, faint yet unmistakable, lingered like a beacon amidst the chaos of Maul's thoughts. It was as if the Force itself demanded their fates intertwine once more. As he neared his destination, Maul paused to take in the vast expanse of the desert. The twin suns hung low on the horizon, their light casting long shadows across the dunes. In that moment, he felt the enormity of what lay ahead. This confrontation was not just about vengeance, it was about closure, about defining the purpose of his fractured existence. The journey to Tatooine had stripped Maul of his titles and ambitions. No longer a Sith apprentice, crime lord, or Mandalorian ruler, he stood as a creature forged in hatred, teetering on the edge of destiny. As the twin suns dipped closer to the horizon, Maul prepared for the inevitable. The final chapter awaited, and he would face it with the fury that had sustained him. The desert night fell, its silence broken by the faint rustle of wind over the dunes. The moons above cast a pale glow, and the firelight illuminated two figures locked in an unspoken challenge. Obi-Wan Kenobi, now an elder statesman of the Force, stood calm and resolute. Across from him, Darth Maul radiated a controlled fury, his crimson lightsaber casting long shadows that danced like specters. For a moment, neither moved. It was not hesitation, but an understanding that this duel was more than an exchange of blows. This was the culmination of decades of animosity. Maul's yellow eyes burned with vengeance, while Kenobi's calm betrayed a lifetime of preparation for this moment. Maul broke the silence first, mocking Kenobi and accusing him of hiding while others suffered. Yet beneath his words was a faint tremor of desperation, an acknowledgement that this confrontation was as much about his need for closure as it was about revenge. Kenobi offered no retort, his silence a declaration in itself. Slowly, he activated his lightsaber, its blue blade steady and unwavering. Maul mirrored the motion, his double-bladed weapon igniting with a hiss. The battle began with an elegance born of experience. Maul lunged, his movements a blend of aggression and precision, honed by years of combat. Kenobi met him with a measured defense, each parry calculated to counter Maul's ferocity. The duel wasn't drawn out, but charged with intensity, every strike carrying the weight of their history. Maul attempted to exploit a move reminiscent of the one that had slain Qui-Gon Jinn years earlier, but Kenobi, a master of foresight, recognized it instantly. In a single fluid motion, he shifted his stance and struck. The simplicity of the counter belied its effectiveness. Maul's saber was cleaved, and the crimson blades extinguished with a flicker. The killing blow followed immediately, clean, deliberate, and final. Maul collapsed, the firelight reflecting in his wide, disbelieving eyes. As his life ebbed, he asked, "Is it the chosen one?" Kenobi's simple affirmation brought an unexpected peace to Maul's features. For all his hatred and pain, his final moment was one of clarity. The endless cycle of his suffering had meaning, however fleeting. In the galaxy's vastness, one chapter closed, and another awaited its telling. Maul's story, woven into galactic lore, transcended fact. Some framed him as a tragic figure shaped by others' ambitions. Others cast him as a villain whose defiance inspired dark reverence. His legacy became a symbol of resilience to the oppressed and a cautionary tale to the powerful, proof of the fragile balance between light and dark. In the shadow of his death, whispers of his tale spread across the galaxy. From the ruins of Mandalore to the depths of Coruscant, his name ignited discussions of fate and consequence. Scholars debated his choices, poets immortalized his pain, and warriors drew strength from his relentless spirit, ensuring his memory endured.